U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham of the Republican Party said that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump intends to help Ukraine win the war with Russia. I suggest listening to this commentary. Ukraine is the richest country in Europe in terms of rare minerals. From $2 to $7 trillion of rare minerals. Ukraine is ready to negotiate with us, not the Russians. It is to our advantage that Russia does not seize this land. This is a real breadbasket for developing countries. Half of the food for Africa comes from Ukraine. Peace with Ukraine will give us favorable economic relations. Trump wants a deal. To get the money back, to get the minerals, it is beneficial for both Ukraine and us. The first question is whether such a plan would be realistic and beneficial for Ukraine, or whether it is still being considered at the level of proposals, of which, according to the international press and various politicians, there are dozens. Is there any novelty effect here? I am deeply convinced that there is no novelty effect. There is a new subject for voicing them, but the essence is the same. If I'm not mistaken, it was 2 weeks ago that information appeared, again, in our wonderful Western press, from which we generally start in our internal information discussion, that 2 points from Vladimir Alexandrovich's victory plan were prepared in advance for whom? A potential or possibly Republican administration. That was the thesis, these 2 points. These were the points that concerned, firstly, minerals and natural resources, and secondly, the issue of our military personnel being able to replace the U.S. military in Europe. And it's a miracle that yesterday Lindsey Graham talked about minerals, and today I think the Times comes out with the idea that, in principle, Ukrainians can replace the military, at bases in the United States, and thereby reduce U.S. spending. I mean, in general, I don't know whether this campaign is coordinated or whether the limited nature of the ideas forces our Western partners to repeat the same thing in the information sense. But the point is that it looks rather coordinated, and one way or another, there is no novelty in this issue. I'm not impressed by Lindsey Graham's rhetoric about that we will pay as a state for supporting the United States with minerals. It looks like, colonial rent. There is no other name for it. In any liberal country, if there is a sale of a license to use subsoil, it is on a competitive basis. If minerals are being developed or mined, the state budget receives a portion of taxes and royalties, and the company operates on a commercial basis. There is no question of paying for support with minerals, as Mr. Graham said. This is outrageous and humiliating for any Ukrainian. Our foreign ministry should respond to such statements. We are being helped through the Budapest Memorandum, but the guarantor countries have not fulfilled their obligations, and one of them has violated the memorandum. Therefore, motivating support with promises to take minerals for mercantile purposes is humiliating for our country. Нам допомогу надають на базі Будапештського меморандуму, який повинен був би гарантувати нашу безпеку, але ті питання, які стосуються нашої безпеки, не були забезпечені країнами-гарантами, і одна із них порушила цей Будапештський меморандум. І зараз мотивувати підтримку словами про те, що ми у вас потім заберемо корисні копалини, і це може якимось чином меркантильно змотивувати Трамп. Воно є для нашої країни. This is my subjective opinion as a citizen of Ukraine. If we are talking about the possibility of transferring certain parts of our subsoil to the United States for use for a fee and with the payment of appropriate taxes, then we should also encourage them to provide us with military assistance or military participation. І в тому числі пану Лінсі Грему, задатись питанням, чи можна ці корисні копалини, чи руду... Mr. Lindsey Graham should ask if it is possible to purchase these. І якщо він задасться цим питанням, він зрозуміє, що Сполучені Штати ж купують ці матеріали зараз, і начебто ні в кого їх
Minerals on another market without providing weapons. The U.S. already buys these materials, and they are not withdrawn as payment for military aid. So the minerals are available on the market, and some consumers can get them without contributing to support for Ukraine. His proposal makes no sense, although it looks like it is on our side, because it forms a motive for the Trump administration to continue to help us. We are saying, look, the Republicans will support us normally, despite the fact that our dignity is being humiliated by this attitude that we will help and take it away tomorrow. And it seems to me that this is unacceptable in this construction. In this case, we can politically maintain the same rhetoric and the same position that we allowed ourselves to maintain in 2022 and 2023. You are obliged by virtue of international obligations. You are obliged by virtue of the fact that you signed the Budapest Memorandum, which is a memorandum, but it is a guarantee. The world order, based on international law, was violated. It was violated through no fault of ours, and you committed yourself to helping as long as necessary, regardless of minerals or soldiers. It seems to me that this should be the position, or further plus. Let them explain or say that we did promise, but we have run out of time, then we will realize that they have indeed run out of time. And what about the other points included in this plan for the Ukrainian president's victory, which, according to the international press, was written specifically for the Trump administration, which was still potential at the time? Trump may be given the authority to review investments, allowing him to choose who can do business with Ukraine. This is still in the early stages of discussion and has not become an official plan. The logic boils down to raw materials and mineral resources, except for China.
Це ж насправді технічне питання, тобто логіка все рівно крутиться довкола сировини, чим покладів тих чи інших мінеральних ресурсів.
In other words, the issue of rebuilding Ukraine is a matter of collective efforts of countries that will be willing to finance us or their businesses, that will be willing to take risks and come here to operate. If we say, and accept the conditions that China will not be an entity that will participate in infrastructure reconstruction in the construction of enterprises on the territory of Ukraine, and so on. So, we continue our foreign policy within the framework of the foreign policy of the United States. Today, when there was a publication that Trump is considering the possibility, I think it was cited by The Guardian, that one of The Guardian's sources said that Trump is ready to give Ukraine to Russia, but if Russia breaks off its relations with China and the European Union, explicitly states that the United States is directing its policy for the coming decades toward confronting and countering China. So, in this concept, if we take the position that investments or acquisitions of enterprises or development of certain enterprises can only be made at the expense of the Western liberal world, but not China, then China will perceive this situation as something that Ukraine is not actually fulfilling, but is a country that moves in the context of U.S. foreign policy. For us, this is risky, as China is the first in terms of trade balance, and the EU is the first among the unions. If we look at a country that can balance the aggressors, including the Russian Federation itself, in terms of their relations, the economy and the involvement of enterprises is an important security factor, and we will lose this element. If we accept these conditions, it is unlikely that a multilateral treaty involving all permanent members of the UN Security Council is possible, since China is one of them. Therefore, if we want to limit ourselves for the future, we will accept such conditions if we, and this is again a matter of sovereignty, accept these restrictions on ourselves or not. If we want a diversified policy that allows us to coexist with countries with high economic potential, then I would not consider these conditions. Trump could have set them, but we have already gone through this period, like with the motorcycle accident, and China still remembers it. When the political elite evaluates business transactions, it confirms the country's interest in the enterprise and the protection of its economy. China did not see this acquisition as a deal through a Russian proxy, but as an action in its own interests. So it seems to me that in fact, when we terminated the agreement on the engine, it was largely welcomed by, say, our Western partners. So we are moving in this direction, more or less, in terms of the possibility of attracting investment from China, or the impossibility of doing so. We live in a country where the principle of legality implies procedures. Related to the distribution of permits for subsoil use or investment projects, openly and with access to all participants. We have bans for all participants in relation to the aggressor country. Its citizens and companies cannot participate in these processes and did not have such an opportunity in 2021, 2022, in privatization procedures, acquisition of subsoil use, etc. If we include restrictions for China and a number of other countries in the law, Chinese investors will not be able to participate in relevant competitions and opportunities. But if we do not include them, they will be able to come and participate, and the strongest will win. And since the strongest will win, the best investors and then financial capital, American, Chinese, Japanese, South Korean, European, and others, will compete accordingly. The highest bidder wins. It seems to me that we have been laying such foundations in matters related to the transparency of state activities in the field of subsoil allocation over the past 10 years. Some experts will disagree with me and say that it is a matter of national security to keep China out. In matters of interpreting words that mean justice and national security, there are no limits, because it's a rather loose interpretation. Someone says it is in the interests, someone says it is not in the interests of national security, and it all depends on who will make the political decision. In order to summarize and generalize the topic of plans and theories that hover around the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine and the United States, and future relations, I would like to quote another quote from our president. He said that Ukraine could end the war next year, and new proposals are expected from President Trump on a plan to end the war, possibly in January. The New York Times concludes that Putin launched the missile strike on the Dnipro in order to raise the stakes in the upcoming negotiations. It is quite obvious that Ukraine is also doing so. Russia and Ukraine have different hopes for Trump. Russia wants the United States and the West to stop helping Ukraine, while Ukraine is trying to show its need for the West. How do you assess Russia's readiness to negotiate after the escalation, including the missile test?
непотрібною буквально. І в цьому контексті, зважаючи на відкриту інформацію, зважаючи на так звану ескалацію від Російської Федерації у вигляді випробовування експериментальної ракети, я хочу спитати про те,
The international press often writes about the negotiations, but they cause emotional fluctuations. Sometimes they are critically important for Russia, sometimes they are a bluff. Russia should not be trusted, but public information can be analyzed. We demonstrate the ability to analyze the situation rationally without emotion.
Ну і словом, це Російська Федерація. Вірити їм точно не будемо, але можемо публічну інформацію проаналізувати. Сподіваюся.
Sophia, you and I have consistently demonstrated the ability to analyze not emotionally, but rather rationally. Regarding resources, today or yesterday it was reported that Russia produces as much ammunition in a month as the European Union does in a year. I think that in terms of resources, this issue does not require additional clarification, and we have fast, as Mr. Schmoot said in an interview. I don't remember if it was Voice of America, I think partners, who act much faster and more efficiently in terms of material assets. Our partners are a fact of life, which we cite with a quote to the top officials and responsible persons. The Russian Federation has the capabilities to wage war. From the point of view of breathing, if there is a pause in hostilities, the party on the defensive takes a breath. And we are still on the defensive. Therefore, stabilization of the front is a priority for us, I think, because it is difficult, as of today, given the tactics used by the Russian Federation, the transfer of troops and strikes at different locations, different areas of operational commands looking for weaknesses. But again, our traditional information agenda is that they will gather forces and strike after some time. Mr. Zelensky, who has returned to active commentary, can be quoted from the situation on the battlefield with yesterday's statements that Russia in 27 will have the opportunity or a new technical opportunity to make a breakthrough on the front tense technologically. And in this case, he is talking about a certain period of time, and the period he mentions, the year 27, can lead to catastrophic consequences for us if we evaluate his words from the position that the breakthrough will be hundreds of kilometers and so on. So in general, the Russian Federation, referring to Mr. Zelensky's words, we can assume that it is not stagnating, but is generally on the way to a certain technological priority or superiority over Ukraine. And again, to quote him, attrition, or whatever, yes, our publications have used the term attrition, is a tactic and strategy that Russia is currently using against Ukraine on the battlefield. I am no longer interested in the stories of our Western partners about interpreting signals or raising the stakes in negotiations. In particular, the use of a 5,500-kilometer medium-range missile against the facility in Dnipro. This is not so important for us, because the strike demonstrated the existence of a weapon capable of reaching 1,000 kilometers. Or it can fly as far as 5,000 kilometers. Accordingly, the entire territory of the European Union is in the zone of combat destruction, against which they have no means of counteraction. And the fact that there was no warhead, or it was with a minimal charge, demonstrates that otherwise the warhead can be different, not necessarily nuclear. Sometimes it can be an ordinary TNT missile, and the consequences of it, since it does not shoot down, will be significant. But the very fact that strategic weapons are used is important, as shorter-range missiles were once part of the strategic security agreements between the USSR, Russia, and the United States.
Тобто ви не розміщуєте системи ПРО, ви не розвиваєте і ліквідовуєте ракети середньої малої дальності.
You do not deploy missile defense systems and do not develop medium and short-range missiles because they have a short flight time, do not shoot down, and pose a threat in the form of a retaliatory strike. Communication between the United States and Russia on the use of these weapons in 30 minutes or an hour resembles the strategic security system of the Cold War. Why? Because when a missile rises into the atmosphere and into outer space, the missile threat early warning system is triggered, the ones that both Russia and the United States have, and the United States is sitting there not understanding where this missile is going, maybe to the Ramstein military base, maybe to a military base in northern Poland, maybe it's going to the UK. They have to decide in 2 minutes whether to strike back, knowing that the missile will not be shot down. That's why there was communication. Who is this signal to? This is not a signal for negotiations, but a demonstration that the talks should not only address the war in Ukraine, but also the relations between the US, NATO, and Russia, including strategic security. Russia has changed its vocabulary, calling the war a war of convenience, and has moved on to the issue of global conflict. The global conflict is being resolved through negotiations at a different level, starting with strategic security issues and then Ukraine. Putin and Russia are demonstrating that further use of such weapons could be directed at both Ukraine and the EU.
Використання схожого характеру озброєння може бути або по Україні з бойовою частиною, і це буде.
Therefore, if you want to return to a state that provides you with a non-threatening environment in terms of the Cold War, nuclear strikes, and so on, then we are ready to discuss security issues, but not only in terms of Ukraine, but in terms of the global deterrence system, the new Cold War, no matter what you call it.
Ми готові обговорювати питання безпеки, але вже не лише в концепції тільки України, але в питаннях в цілому.
Therefore, they are ready for these negotiations, and then, as a result, after resolving their strategic issues, which are a priority for them, we will return to local or regional issues. And it seems to me that this is the only way to look at this situation. Therefore, if we can interpret these events as signals, then this is a signal about what the negotiations should be about from the point of view of Russia. On strategic security in the relations between Europe, NATO on the one hand, and the Russian Federation and Belarus as an allied country on the other, as Russia's nuclear umbrella extends to Belarus after the approval of the nuclear doctrine. In conclusion, I would like to touch on one more topic, Russia's hybrid methods, which it used even before 2014. The graph writes that Russia is ready to launch a wave of cyber attacks on the UK that could cut off power to millions. At a NATO conference on Monday, British Minister Pat McDuffie will report that Russian military and cyber criminals stepped up attacks and expanded targets to several NATO members and partners last year. On the one hand, we have been talking about cyber criminals and hackers who may be under the auspices of the Russian Federation for decades. And on the other hand, Russia has been intensifying these attacks for a long time. How threatening is this for the alliance, for NATO, for those countries that continue to help Ukraine? Critical infrastructure can be threatened in a variety of ways, including through physical attacks. According to the congressional report, such threats can be realized in a variety of ways, including hiring individuals to damage facilities such as gas pipelines or power lines.
загроза критичній інфраструктурі. Ні, звій тренд. Вони аналізували якраз його. Що типи загрози можуть втілювати в життя по-різному. Може бути нанятий якийсь пришелепкуватий на території країн Альянсу. Сказати, слухай, ти там, не знаю, люди ж по-різному в різні...
At the local level, we can see this story when, for example, our security service discovers facts when Ukrainian citizens are found there via telegram, walking around and damaging railroad tracks or the corresponding transformer substations. This is one type of threat. The second type of threat is, let's say, the organization of a terrorist act, which is also a type of threat. And there are remote types of threats. And remote types of threats are due to the fact that all complex systems and critical infrastructure operate using either local networks or closed systems, or, let's say, somehow have access to internet resources that are open there. Plus, they purchase equipment. The equipment may already have tools that allow penetration into the system, plus accounting, delivery, and so on, all of which are also computer systems. This implies a remote ability to hack into the system, block data on users on volumes that do not make it impossible to use or power systems. The threat to critical infrastructures, such as heating, water, and filtration systems, is constant, as the United States faces similar attacks every year. To this end, important enterprises already have cybersecurity departments in place, but there are always both weaknesses and ways to protect them.
Може відбутися. Це та загроза, яка втілюється в життя періодично, і кожен раз тобі треба закривати ці слабкі ланки. Тому на критичних підприємствах у них вже
Because this is not something that cannot be ruled out. It is the reality in which we already live. It's already part of this life practice, unfortunately. And in this part, there is no magic bullet that will say, we said everything today at a press conference, and tomorrow it will definitely not happen. No, this cannot happen. You can create and strengthen your own infrastructure systems. That is, when a hacker has breached one level of security, penetrated one system, let's say, you have a replacement system, and you can quickly eliminate this negative consequence. Moreover, one of the infrastructure companies even paid a ransom to hackers to unlock their information system, and they even paid in Bitcoin. The situation is that the main recipient of Bitcoin, according to some information, is the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and then later these crypto wallets were blocked and the funds frozen, which, from the point of view of cryptocurrency owners, looks almost impossible. Then some of these people were detained, but such cases also exist. So there is such a threat, and the physical threat that we have also seen, by the way, this week. It's a story about a Chinese ship with Russian sailors that accidentally anchored 2 underwater high-speed internet connection cables. Well, accidentally, as I say, there was one more thing that was missing in this news story that was not perfect. What was missing was coke from Iran and equipment from North Korea on that ship. Ukraine has long warned about Russia's hybrid methods, but sometimes these warnings are limited to statements about the danger to Europe and the need to help Ukraine. And then there is news of Germany buying new uniforms for its military in times of crisis.
Подекуди це завершується лише заявами про те, який небезпечний період може чекати на європейські та інші країни, як потрібно до цього готуватися, як потрібно допомагати Україні, а потім хоп, і з'являється інформація про те,
But okay, of course it's important.
Кризи планує закупити нову парадну форму для своїх військових. Але гаразд.
We have experienced these cyber attacks ourselves. Our energy system has been attacked several times. It is written about in reports, but it is not spoken about publicly. We can also talk about Kyivstar quite consciously, about the banking system. So we are experiencing all this. Why talk about it? It is important to explain that everything does not function without threats, and tariffs may have to be raised. For the UK, cybersecurity needs funding, and people need to understand that there are real threats. Europe has become accustomed to stability, forgetting what real wars and threats are, so it needs to implement information measures.